Why do you want to do this, and what do you think this is?
So, a while back I was watching Yeek Studios' We Have Forgotten Love, and it got me thinking about how, in spite of my more caustic writing regarding media I dislike, one thing I can't stand is how reductive and often hostile criticism is presented by many anime fans. Additionally, as Trixie mused over possible appeals of several anime she liked and disliked, I began wondering how I'd go about doing the same, as it makes for an interesting exercise I feel is worth generally trying out. Admittedly, it's harder for the average person to do this with shows they hate. Not everyone's used to constantly being surrounded by a myriad of different perspectives, nor do I feel that people tend to think about how certain types of media resonate with them while others don't. Hell, I sure struggle with it. For example, it took almost 5 years for me to be able to reconcile with how even Isekai was Smartphone, a work I despise to no end, is more than just a work that exists for its own sake. Now, I've been trying to be thoughtful of what and how I criticize for years now, trying to not just find a point of the work, but also why one might gravitate towards it even if I can't. However, in the more than 4 years since I watched and tore that show to shreds, I have never found one, and could never conceive of one until attempting this thought exercise for myself. Now, forgive me if this comes off as rude or reductive, but I honestly feel that the biggest appeal for the show is its escapism value. Most of the show's audience is probably extremely tired, and to turn to a show like this, they probably want to read or watch something as unchallenging and unstimulating as possible, whether they be a teenager sick of school or an overworked, downtrodden adult. Admittedly, such phrasing can come off as dickish, but honestly, if you're already big into isekai for the easy consumption and escapism element of it, that's probably a perfect reason for one to find comfort and entertainment in this kind of show. It's more of what you like, with no attempts at subversion that a lot of light novels try to do with certain cliches, or the premise of being thrust into another world. It's simple, straightforward, passive, and ready to cater. Looking at the appeal of a show, or who would even watch something you dislike, can be challenging enough. But even among those who do, another hurdle is the act of not being condescending in the process. Of course, some people actively try to be as dickish in their description of a work and its fans as humanly possible, which is one of the biggest turnoffs I have for any review or video regarding a work. Naturally, it's easier to be a lot more kind and genuine when describing the appeal of something you adore, like say, how I'd describe what gravitates myself and perhaps some others to a show like Code Geass. If I had to boil it down to one idea, it would be the show's theatrical presentation. The bombastic score by Kotaro Nakagawa, the over-the-top characters and scenarios, the exaggerated facial expressions, the snappy editing, Goro Taniguchi's direction, the deliciously hammy voice acting, the design and general aesthetic of Lelouch's Zero persona and how he carries himself in it, the cliffhangers rivaled only by the likes of Mamoru Penguin Drum, etc. It all coalesces into an exhilarating experience, especially in the first season. Of course I'd say all that though. Season 1 is arguably my favorite anime, and as such, the presentation naturally elevates my view of the show's overarching storytelling, character writing, and thematic exploration. If the show were dry in its presentation, a lot of its stupider moments would be much more maddening, and a lot of the more satisfying and intricate elements wouldn't be as engaging. Hell, if that were the case, it probably wouldn't sell the conniving nature of Lelouch and his grandiose plans enough to really justify it being so thoroughly compared to Death Note, back when those two shows dominated the broader anime discussion back in 2006. On that note, one has to consider the execution of a work as well. Inherently, there is subjectivity to one's perspective, but even if one were to look at how different shows execute certain traits or ideas more critically, it's hard not to see the differences and say, why I love the over-the-top comedy in Kaguya-sama, but abhor it in Kimetsu no Yaiba. You know, apart from it being the former's bread and butter as a rom-com, as opposed to the latter just dabbling in it on occasion as a battle shonen. Mamoru Takayama is one of the best TV anime directors of recent years. Both Kaguya-sama and Shougenroku Rakugo Shinju consistently feature impressive shots and intricate sequences, and he's able to weave his team through impressive pinnacles of anime drama and comedy. Additionally, the voice acting in Kaguya-sama matches the expressions and overall presentation without ever coming off as grating to me. It helps that the writing of these characters is intricate and ever-expanding, allowing for even similar kinds of jokes to be made in engaging new ways that tell us more about the characters or react to situations that do the same. Conversely, Kimetsu no Yaiba is far more in-your-face and obnoxious to me, and Zenitsu's voice when he's whining or screaming is as soul-rending as Asta screaming in early Black Clover, and I don't find him, or most Kimetsu no Yaiba characters for that matter, to have much explored dimension to them, nor do I enjoy Zenitsu's characterization to begin with. The jokes and situations also feel as samey as fairy tales, especially in regards to Zenitsu, so that doesn't help matters. Especially considering that at least fairy tales jokes sometimes require multiple characters to interact with each other, instead of Zenitsu's shtick or even Inosuke's shtick just largely limiting themselves to maybe 2 or 3 characters doing the same damn shit every time. At the end of the day though, both shows have a lot of over-the-top comedy with wacky facial expressions and screaming. But ignoring how one is primarily a rom-com and the other is more of a battle shonen, I think you can feel the differences at play even in shows that theoretically take similar approaches to their comedy. Now admittedly, some people may just hate over-the-top screamy comedy in general, and while I can safely say that both shows, especially the former, have it more than just for gags, I've seen it cited as a reason people dislike Kaguya-sama and Kimetsu no Yaiba, so clearly things are a matter of taste, no matter how much you feel quality factors into the equation. As a personal example, despite acknowledging how Fooly Cooly is just a thematically intricate and immaculately produced OVA, I still find that the more obnoxious, in-your-face comedy in the early episodes is a massive turnoff to me, and it's part of the reason why I still can't enjoy much of the show until the last 2 or 3 episodes. By contrast, the more mellow approach of Fooly Cooly Alternative resonates with me a hell of a lot more, so I end up enjoying it more than any of the other Fooly Cooly shows out there, even if the writing and production are less impressive than the original. But anyway, to wrap up this little exercise, I want to tie it both to my last video and the one I plan to work on after this one. I went in pretty hard into Carol and Tuesday in the last video, which you should totally check out by the way, but even in it, I tried to remain fair and throw in aspects I liked about it. If I were to tell you the appeal of the show from someone who was disappointed by it, I'd start by calling it a show for music fans. Sure, its focus on an upstart duo of acoustic pop singers tackling a more cynical industry inherently provides it a wider appeal for mass audiences, but the show throws several genres like hip-hop, dream pop, dubstep, and other genres for more music listeners to potentially gravitate to it and take interest in it as well. Moreover, and while this next one might be even more of a niche appeal to people who don't already look into the production side of the industry or care about auteurs, Shinichiro Watanabe's name is attached to this. I'd like to think that having the director behind Samurai Champloo and Cowboy Bebop, among other titles, was one of the first things that a lot of us gravitated to when taking interest in this show. Now that it's over and done with, perhaps some people also like the anti-ICE/pro-immigrants commentary it provided, and the setting being a futuristic take of late 2010s America. Now in practice, I find much of what I discussed here to not work out so well, and I can tell that some found the more political slant of the second half to be a major turnoff, but that's not what matters here. Carol and Tuesday is still a generally well-liked show that did pretty well for its season, but the final show I want to discuss is the exact inverse. I'm gonna try not to step on my next video's toes too much, but I want to provide a taste of what mesmerized me about Fate Extra Last Encore as one of 2018's many strange and fascinating failures. Like with Code Geass, I'd say what appeals to me the most about this entry is its presentation and aesthetic. At least for the 10 episodes that make up the TV broadcast. The finale special, that's its own can of worms. The setting is this metaphysical nightmare, as dazzling as it is striking and strange. At times it's most reminiscent of Madoka Magica, another Shaft show I've yet to watch in the sea of works by a stylistically captivating studio I've hardly tried more than a handful of shows of. Conceptually, Last Encore is by far the most wicked entry in the franchise, taking place 1,000 years after a disaster before only a few characters are left to manage or control a multi-layer, semi-post-apocalyptic setting that gets more barren and desolate as it goes on until the finale special. Nero is easily my favorite deuteragonist in the series, being this over-the-top and somewhat egotistical romantic that serves as both a foil and eventual inspiration to its enigmatic main lead, Hakuno. Actually, looking at it now, I'm reminded of one of last year's more high-profile community disappointments, Tactop Destiny. What struck out to me and instantly sold me on a show I ended up not even watching was the visuals of the OP's chorus. The nocturnal setting for which the big action sequence of the OP takes place. The enigmatic main lead waving a baton like a conductor or a maestro in a symphony. The equally curious yet far more striking badass female lead battling strange creatures. The rose motif being worn as a beautiful red dress being tossed around. It looked almost tailor-made for me. And when I heard the writing quality took a dramatic nosedive real quick and that the show ended up being a glorified gacha commercial, I was utterly crestfallen. I'm sure if I didn't hear how things panned out and how bad the reception was getting, I would have absolutely tried to get to this show as it was about to conclude, or at least soon after it ended before realizing the disappointment that would likely lie ahead. As for Last Encore, there's certainly more I wish to praise about this show, and a lot of what did gravitate to me about this show, aside from it being an interesting new Fate title for a Fate fan, did disappear by the end of the finale special. But we can talk about why Fate Extra Last Encore wasn't given the chance to fail at a later date. Now that I'm done presenting this exercise, I'm hoping that it showcased a little more of my perspective on things, and perhaps even got you thinking about what appeals to you or someone else about a work you consume the way We Have Forgotten Love did for me. I actively encourage everyone to think like this when they're criticizing a work they dislike. After all, it's important to not get too caught up in one's own disdain that they become myopic in how they view a show and anyone who enjoys it. That isn't healthy for discussion, and honestly, it's what I feel has been an absolute plague on our community for years now. We're well past the days of anime fans hiding and gathering in niche forums, and people being elitist about certain acclaimed works on a higher scale. Anime is far more open than ever, more diverse than ever, more expansive than ever. Too expansive in some ways. The medium has never exactly been the healthiest, and has reached several breaking points this past half a decade or so. Every year, there are several high-profile production disasters that wreak havoc on works to the point that that's what they're known for the most. And we're still seeing catastrophic reports of industry abuse by studios. The industry is unhealthy, and so is anime discussion. Elitist warring among fans of mainstream works is as rampant as ever. Whenever a new controversial show comes out, a piece of my soul and faith in anime discourse dies alongside it. I've fought the good fight for about half a decade now, and I'm weary. However, I look at what some of my favorite content creators and participants in anime discourse do. The way they try to provide a more informed and understanding perspective of the medium by tackling certain topics and misconceptions, or provide fascinating looks into the production of works. Even several content creators I respect but haven't watched too much of do this, and I admire them for it just as much as I do those who provide the same for other mediums. I see all of them, and know that, broadly speaking, we have the same goal in mind. We want to not just provide our own perspectives, but perhaps even work towards making anime discourse better for everyone. If we can provide those informed perspectives and encourage understanding what it is you adore or criticize, as well as why others do the same, perhaps the community might be a better place. At least, that's what my mission is.